didn't. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Come in. We have so many doorbells at our house, it's kind of scary when someone shows up, because that ring makes both phones go off, and then there's doorbells going off, and it's just like, oh, there's someone here. Why are there people here? So we're going to talk about interfaces. And from the very, very beginning of computer programming, you guys have been told an interface is what the user sees, right? The user interface. Well, not this one. So this is a place where we're going to use the same exact term to mean something completely different. So love to do that in programming. It always works out. It's a terrible, terrible thing. That's kind of why the new people like Tim Franklin and some of those that are into user experiences call it a user experience. I think because the interface term is really for a special kind of class. So what is an interface? It's a named set of abstract members. Well, so what does that mean? Well, an abstract member, this is from our book, an abstract member, that's just referring to methods that use that abstract keyword, those methods that aren't fully implemented, that don't have a body. Those are abstract members. So abstract members don't provide a default implementation. It's first thing Monday morning this morning, reading some of these sentences can take a second. You might have to step back and kind of think about exactly what is it saying. So it's pretty meaningful. It's saying that an interface is just a bunch of abstract method definitions. So an interface can be used to express a behavior. And why do we need interfaces? Well, the main reason is with C#, we can only inherit from one class. So we can only have one parent class to our class. When we're working with interfaces, we can implement as many interfaces as we want, so we can support multiple behaviors. So that's important. This little example is in our textbook, and they show, here's an abstract method named clone. And we have this abstract class, clonable type. So their point is, this polymorphic interface, why is this interface polymorphic? What's that polymorphic thing mean?
Because it can have many different forms depending on what narrative.
Exactly, it can have many different forms. And the form this clone method takes is going to depend on how it's implemented in the class that implements it, right? So that's why it's polymorphic, because it could be implemented in many different ways, all with the same name, clone, because it's abstract. So we're saying you can implement it, you can implement it, you can implement it. But in order to implement it, you must inherit from this class, the way this is set up. There's no other way. So say we have a minivan, and we would like to have our minivan inherit from a class called car. Well, if we want our minivan to inherit from the car class and have that clone method, we need to inherit from both. We can't do that, because in C# we'd say multiple inheritance is not possible. We can't let you inherit from more than one parent. So what can we do? We can create an interface. Now this interface isn't exactly the one they were talking about. Oh, I think it is. It's called iClonable. So an interface looks basically just like a class definition. It just says the keyword interface here instead of the keyword class. Doesn't have any parameters. That's a little different. Within the interface, all we have are basically method headers, method constructors. So this method constructor would be implemented in a class, public object clone, and that would be it. It returns a data type of object. It doesn't have any parameters. Now, when I'm working with an interface like this, I could list as many different methods here as I want. I could have one that returns a string, one that returns an integer, and I could specify their parameter types, like string pass value, integer such and such. Everything that I specify in this interface for this method is going to have to match up exactly for the class that implements it. So if I were going to implement that clone method, I would just have comma, iClonable right here, and then I would be able to implement that clone method and everything would be fine.
I think I've seen a lot of these in Unity.
What's that?
I think I've seen a lot of these interfaces in Unity.
Yeah, and so the reason is, that's actually kind of a really good example. If I'm working with Unity and I'm working with a game engine, in my game, I have several life cycle events, like the beginning of the game, right? Or a frame update of the game. So what Unity does is they take C# and they implement all sorts of interfaces. And they say, if you're going to use me, this Unity stuff, then you have to implement a method called update. And that would be run every time there's a frame update. So you're actually doing that within Unity to say people have to have this method in their code because I'm expecting it. If they don't have this method coded, then I don't know what to do because I'm expecting it. It's something that has to be there. So why would I use an interface if I'm not creating something like Unity? Well, the main reason would be to enforce logic, to enforce naming standards across my project. So say I've got 20 developers working all on the same project, and I want every single one of them to implement a method, updated date. And in that method, they're supposed to change this updated date stamp on the database row to show that this database row got updated, okay? And we want every single one of them to do it the same way. Well, if I create an interface then and tell all of my developers you must use this interface, now every single one of them must implement that method in their code and they must name it the same way. So if I, as an administrator, need to look through all the code and find those methods, why is this updated date not being correct on our employee record? I'm going to look at the employee class, where is that updated method, and I can find that code. So it's beneficial to me as an administrator that that method name is always the same. Now, can you think of other places where you could do something like that, where an interface like that, forcing someone to put a method in their code? Where would that be beneficial? It's kind of hard to think of places, and yet when they're there, you'll know, oh, this is a great thing for me to do. Think about if you were doing a, maybe like a credit card application, you were processing a credit card, and you were going to hand this out to all sorts of different companies, but you want every single one of them to do some sort of post process after they complete whatever it is they're going to do with the credit card. Well, through an interface then, when you give them that DLL, it's already got that interface included, so it forces them to create that method. Does that make sense? It kind of is like a way to push your rules out to all the developers so that they have to do it the way you want it done. Does that make sense? It's kind of hard because they're kind of generic. Well, so the interface that we want to create for our sports team, they want something to do with budgeting. So we could create an interface, I budget, and then we could make the method or the action that everybody has to perform annual expenses. And then every one of our teams that implements this interface would have to have a method that returned their annual expenses, like $50,000 or however much their annual expenses were. So it's not much different than us putting that abstract class in our base class, It's just that this interface then can float alone. So I want this budget, iBudget, and in my iBudget, I want a method called annual budget. We're going to use that interface for all our sports teams. But at our college, we also have a whole nother application that has to do with clubs. And all of our clubs, our student organizations, are going to be using that same interface so that they have to implement an annual budget or an annual expense amount method in the same way. So that way we can have that interface be used by all of our different types of entities across the organization, even though they're not necessarily related. So to create an interface, it's just the same as adding anything else to our project. It's an interface. And then here's one they have in the book. They really do a good job in the book of explaining it. And in the book, they have an iPointy interface. So they only implement that interface for utensils that are pointy. So the switchblade implements the iPointy. The fork implements the iPointy interface. If we have a spoon down here, it does not, because it doesn't need to be concerned about whether it's pointy. And then in our book, they talk about a class of shapes. And they create an interface for drawable shapes and printable shapes. Those are our base interfaces, just like base classes. And then they use that to develop an eye-shaped interface. And then our rectangle and our square object implement that eye-shaped interface. So this is how that looks on a UML diagram. We see that little circle to show that we implement that interface in our class. So it shouldn't be a huge effort. Now, whenever you guys are creating this last thing, your tester, that should be it. Any questions about interface? Thoughts about it?
Is it standard practice to put I in front of all the numbers? Is that something we're expecting to do?
No, that was just from your book. So that's just an example of the UML diagram. So you can see how it wants them to look with the little circle. That should be all. So we're going to implement one. The one that we want is something like iBudget, or something that has to do with budgeting or expense amounts of our sports teams. Now, as you create your tester, you're going to put your interface in. It says online on Canvas, you have to have 2 different projects. Don't worry about it. It's just really hard to manage all of these different projects. So you can turn the same one in for both assignments. That's fine. You don't have to have separate ones. What I want is, the easiest thing for all of us would be for you to pull all of your source code together and just get away from the DLLs, because you've had your practice with those. Just pull all our source code together so that you can create a tester. And in your tester, we need to implement an interface somewhere. That makes sense for all that. Yes, for convenience, because it's going to be hard enough. And I want you to be able to use the debugger and all those great things that you can use if you pull all your source code in. Okay, questions before we get to work? Because today really is just for working for you guys for the rest of the day. So let me know if you need anything here, if you have any questions, and we'll get it all fixed. If you're having TFS problems, let me know too. I'm gonna shut this off.
I feel like everybody's always having this.
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty safe.
I have not had